About your plans for the coming year and to bring you a report on the progress and the outlook for cooperative marketing of grain and farm supplies as I see it. Things are quite a bit different this fall from what they were a year ago. American farmers then were in the middle of harvesting the biggest corn and soybean crops of all times. Here in South Dakota, your wheat, oats, and rye crops were record breakers, and even a dry spell did not keep you from having a pretty good corn crop. Around the world, it was the same story, with record wheat and feed crops and oilseed harvests. The big U.S. crop was a result not only of generally excellent weather, but of a larger acreage due to the corn blight scare of the year before. So the set-aside program was opened up wide to make sure we did not run out of grain if the blight struck again. Opening up production resulted in some very, very low prices, some of the lowest since the very early years of World War II. It did have one good result, however. In creating lower cattle and hog production, our livestock men did get adequate prices this past year. Grain sold at low prices until midwinter, when some recovery took place. But generally, prices remained badly depressed until the new crop year began. Despite this very, very low grain prices, exports of wheat went down substantially. Soybeans barely held steady, and feed grains increased only a little. This shows that under conditions of worldwide surplus, our export markets do not do the job, no matter how cheap grain prices are allowed to drop. Against this background of a very big supplies of grain and limited markets, I want to give you a brief report on our business year ending May 31 of 1972. A full report, of course, will be made at our annual meeting November 28 and 29 at St. Paul. Not all the figures are ready yet, due to a change in our income tax status and because of the merger of all of the divisions into one corporate structure. Not as much grain was marketed by G.T.A. this past year as the year before, since more grain was held back on the farm for reseal, awaiting better prices. Nevertheless, our members sent us 187 million bushels to market, compared with 202 million the year before. Of this, nearly 16 million was from South Dakota, a little over 8%. North Dakota again was our leading state with 80 million bushels, or 43%, followed by Minnesota with 65, 35%, and Montana with 24 million bushels, or 13%. We took in about the same number of dollars as a year earlier, just over 350 million. But our net savings were down to a little over $6 million. This was our second best year, despite the lower volume. I know you will be pleased with these good earnings, but I do want to point out that the grain business operates on some of the lowest margins to be found anywhere. Despite what you may be told by outsiders who don't know anything about the grain trade, while more money is made on grain processing than on grain handling, it still is not very much. Bigger margins are made on consumer foods sold under brand names by fast service food chains and by those who make ready prepared meals for home or restaurant use. Just to show you what I mean, Our dividends a year ago were less than 2 cents a bushel on wheat, rye, and oats, and only a little over 2 cents on barley and corn. On oil seeds, which we process and refine at great expense, we made savings of over 5 cents on soybeans and nearly 8 cents on flaxseed. On feed and other farm supplies, our savings last year were better than 3 cents on the dollar. Good, but not enormous. What makes our savings total up to millions of dollars is the tens of millions of bushels of grain our members market 100% cooperatively, all the way from the farm to terminal markets and export elevators. If we could operate without any new capital and return all savings in cash immediately, you can see that just our savings alone would not make a great big difference in the net income of the members who earned them. To judge the value of a cooperative, it is necessary to look at more than its net savings or the cash payments it can make while still staying in business. Other benefits usually are much larger than these, such as added competition in the marketplace, giving producers more markets for their grains, opening up new markets, such as for sunflowers, helping to get and keep beneficial farm legislation, providing many kinds of help to local elevators so they can give service and make added savings, providing market information for members, making available farm supplies and services equal to or better than others, helping many farm groups such as Farmers Union, state cooperative associations, young people's groups, commodity promotion groups, and all national organizations of importance to grain farmers. And all of these benefits cost money. That would not be possible if we did not make a success of our many local elevators and our central G.T.A. processing and selling activities. All of our 9 G.T.A. divisions were in the black this past year, with grain processing plants adding to what our elevators did, plus a very good year in our 2 family supply divisions, G.T.A. Feeds and the Great Plains Supply Company. As you know, we operate and own 5 terminal and 4 sub-terminal elevators. In addition, we own and operate elevators jointly with our cooperatives at St. Louis, Missouri, and at New Orleans, Louisiana, to distribute grain to the southern states and to be able to export the year around. We have 6 processing plants: soybeans, flaxseed, sunflowers, malting barley, and durum wheat, and a dozen feed manufacturing plants, of which the biggest and the best is located at Sioux Falls, South Dakota. G.T.A. Feeds continue to be an outstanding part of G.T.A., with a steady growth and support by farmers and ranchers. This last year, sales took another big jump for us. We are now ahead of the competition in South Dakota, a tribute to the greater and greater use of G.T.A. feeds by thousands of farmers and ranchers in this state. During the past year, we have paid out to estates of former members or patrons nearly $900,000, in addition to the 20% cash payments to current patrons. We also retired the rest of the savings in 43 and 44 for a total of about $2,800,000 that you received in cash, almost half of our earnings last year. Total cash payments by G.T.A. for 34 years have been over $30 million, not counting over $4 million in educational funds paid to the 4 states in which we operate. The net worth of G.T.A., all owned directly by individual farmers or through their local cooperatives, is now over $65 million. That's an average investment per family of around $500 apiece. But even this would belong to someone else if we had not worked together to get it. One new change we are making to try to hold down the expenses of keeping track of a multitude of small patronage earnings is to limit our dividends to $10 or more. You may think this is a high limit, but records which must be kept over many years cost more for very small dividends than the dividends themselves. But well over 90% of our total line or Great Plains dividends are for $10 or more. What limit the affiliated may use in figuring their dividends is, of course, their own decision to make. Since May 31st, some really big developments have taken place. First, as I said before, farmers harvested one of our best yielding crops. Most of your state is now bringing in one of its best corn crops. Although our markets were very low when early grain harvest took place, by mid-August prices began to rise rapidly. I don't have to tell you now that this rise was caused by the greatest crop failure in Russia in many years. Since Russia is the largest wheat producer, a heavy loss of their wheat crop had great effect on our wheat markets. What hasn't been talked about much is the great effect which the wettest summer in nearly 125 years has had on wheat quality in Europe. We often forget that Europe produces as much wheat as the U.S. and Canada put together, and almost as much as Russia alone. Since it is mostly soft wheat, they need good harvest weather to get good milling quality. This year, there just isn't enough to go around, so they have bought much more bread and durum wheat from us. And until September 25th, and the wheat export subsidy was dropped to zero, nearly 1 billion bushels of wheat had been contracted by various countries, and less than half of this was by Russia. That means that Europe has bought far more wheat than usual and has shared in the subsidy program nearly as much as the Russians. Japanese purchases also have been quite substantial. While the Russians bought no spring wheat and only a little durum wheat, the Europeans took large amounts of both durum and springs. And G.T.A. has made sales to Europe this year for delivery into late spring and even next summer. G.T.A. so far in this business year, 1973, is off to a good start, thanks partly to the Russian drought and the poor quality European crop. Oilseeds perhaps face more competition every day from palm oil produced in tropical countries. The outlook for higher grain prices is not at present strong, except for wheat, and even wheat prices are only back to about where they were in 1946. At our next G.T.A. convention, delegates will be asked to vote on a bylaw to allow delegates to our convention from Nebraska to join those from South Dakota to elect South Dakota directors. Iowa delegates will join Minnesota, and those from Wyoming and Idaho will join Montana delegates. This will give, and the reason for it, the delegates from Great Plains supply yards, lumber yards, or G.T.A. feed accounts, now brought in from the merger a year ago, an equal part in electing directors to the G.T.A. board. Most recently, you may or may not have heard that the National Federation of Grain Cooperatives, which G.T.A. has been a member of over 30 years, is merging with the National Council of Cooperatives on January 1st of 1973. By putting those two organizations together will give us a much stronger arm in the legislative branch of the federal government. And finally, let me touch on another very important development for the future of G.T.A. and the co-op grain marketing in the Northwest. And these are times, as you know, of very rapid change in the grain business and agriculture. Very little is the same today as it was when I first had something to do around the grain elevator. Most of the elevators were built in the days of horse-drawn wagons with maybe 80 bushels capacity, moving at 3 miles an hour if the roads were good, to an elevator which very likely handled less grain in a year than many farmers raise today. Grain had to move by rail to a central market where buyers could pick out what they wanted. The surplus was stored mostly at the terminals or at mills. Firms at the terminal markets took charge of selling grain across the country or for export. That's pretty much the way it was when we started 30-some years ago. Now much has changed in the production and marketing of grain, and much more is in the process of changing. The future pattern of grain marketing is very much in doubt at this time. It is for that reason that the G.T.A. Board of Directors ordered a major study of the future of country grain marketing by the best available agency in the business, Experience Incorporated of Minneapolis, a team of retired professional men aided by younger experts from many sources. And after many months, 9 in fact, this team has brought in a very fine report. It contains much valuable information and many definite suggestions on directions G.T.A. could take to do the job our members will need. Our board is asked that the ideas and facts presented in this study be placed before the G.T.A. members in an orderly fashion so that they can consider what steps it would be best to take. A plan for this examination will be worked out for the approval of the G.T.A. board. Just what conclusions the members of G.T.A. will eventually come to cannot be judged at this time. But I am sure that this study will force all of us to do some good, hard thinking about the future needs of grain farmers in our area and the kind of cooperative marketing which will meet the needs. Our board is unanimous in support of a thorough examination of this report, and you will be hearing more about it in the months to come. Let me tell you just some of the highlights of this study, which looks forward to what may be the situation in 1980, a time not too far off, if we have to make major changes in our way of doing business, as the study tells us we will. First, we all know that grain production is getting more concentrated on fewer and larger farms, with the same trend going on with livestock, dairy, and poultry production. That trend will be even greater by 1980, with less wheat and barley, but more feed grain and oilseed production and much, much more livestock production. Larger grain farmers will store on their farms more and more grain. The grain farmer will do more of his own selling, scheduling sales for regular delivery over many months as his own merchandiser. He will need more help on market information. Grain will move through fewer but larger elevators, often by large shipments direct to big buyers, bypassing the terminal grain markets as some is already doing today. Many branch rail lines probably will be abandoned, and trucks will haul farther than they do now. Reorganizing our country elevator system to fit this new situation will be a major challenge. Farmers' needs for more feeds and other farm supplies raise important questions about how closely grain marketing should be tied to farm supply functions. Mergers of grain and supply cooperatives are taking place or are under serious consideration in several other parts of the country now. And we, as members of regional cooperatives, should study the possibilities of mergers in our own area. There are questions to be answered about co-op exports and co-op grain processing, which are of the greatest importance to all grain farmers. All of these questions should be examined carefully by the grain farmers in the G.T.A. family, and decisions reached on the correct direction we should take. We have the chance to do a much bigger job of marketing in the future than now. But it will take intelligent action to make that come about. Our members have a very real challenge before them in the next few years before 1980, one which will test our ability to work together constructively as seriously as we ever tested in our long history. I have no doubt that we can meet this challenge if we build on our great experience of successful cooperation and stick together to find new, more modern ways of cooperating. Farmers, regional cooperatives, farm organizations must cooperate together. The goals are the same. We must merge the regionals. We must not fight and compete. In the state of South Dakota alone, you have several regionals making feed. The farmers are paying the bill. When are we going to get together in our regionals, our farm organizations, and get the job done? We must give as well as take. We must forget our privileges. If, as leaders, if we are serious and want to get the job done, some of us will probably have to step down. G.T.A. is accused of being too big. Now, in driving into Huron this morning, I heard several reports from your convention, and I understand they wore out the Russian wheat deal, so I didn't say much about it. But do you know that if the 17 members, regional cooperative grain marketing associations in the United States, there are 17 of them like G.T.A., we're the biggest, if they were all to merge, you would then be almost as big as Cargill. Almost as big as Cargill. And then you expect us to deal directly with the Russians. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. I want to thank all of you in the Farmers Union who helped make this another good year for G.T.A., our affiliated elevators, and our many thousands of farmer members and patrons in your state. Thank you, and let me come back again.
Thank you, Barney, for those forward-looking ideas that you projected. I just noticed that Barney's assistant manager, Lowell Hargis, is in the crowd. Lowell, will you stand up so they can all see you? And I understand they're on their way to North Dakota for a meeting up there tonight, so they will not be able to stay with us. So thank you again, Barney, and thank you, gentlemen. Is Alan Burke around? Alan, will you bring Vincent Prosh to the platform? I'm going to call Alan Burke to bring Vince Prosh to the platform to talk about our tax suit. And this is the first time that Al has been on the stage to be introduced in this convention. Alan Burke, as you know, is our editor, public relations man, and he writes news releases and speeches. And whatever we need to have done that takes a professional touch, Alan Burke does it. He's a professional journalist, and he's a great guy besides being a good editor. Al, why don't you stand up and take a bow? And another reason that I brought Al up here is because I get so bogged down in going to meetings and taking care of responsibilities even outside of South Dakota. I'm on the national board, as you know, on the National Executive Committee of the National Farmers Union. And quite a lot of nitty-gritty, quite a lot of day-to-day work is required to prepare the lawsuit that we're now presenting in court to challenge the constitutionality of property tax as a main source of revenue for public education. And so Alan has really done most of the work with Vincent Prosh, and is much more familiar with the project than I am. But we're happy today to have with us the lawyer from the law firm of Munford, Prosh, Sage, and Party. Oh, are they? Why don't you call them?
Well, Bennett wanted me to bring the co-plaintiffs in our historic lawsuit to the platform. They're here with us today. Wilbur Cetera and John Krieber. They're both from the Tyndall area. Wilbur and John, if you want to bring your wives up too, that'd be fine. Could you come up and sit with us on the stage? And your children there too are all right, because the children, that was one of the qualifications for them to be a plaintiff in our lawsuit, is because they have school children and they're property tax payers in the bottom school district, which is the test district in our lawsuit. And Leif Lunder, our District 1 director, is going to bring them up here. We are very proud to have people like the Wilbur Cetera and the John Krieber families in Farmers Union, because they've made a great sacrifice to be part of this lawsuit, because they have to answer a lot of questions, and they're real celebrities in their community, and they'll go down in history in South Dakota when we win that lawsuit. And they had to sign papers, and you know, it's always a little scary to get involved in a lawsuit of any kind, and particularly one that is as historic as the Farmers Union property tax suit. And we're very proud to have these two families with us. And up on the stage. Well, the man who's going to make our presentation today on the property tax suit is one of the most outstanding lawyers in South Dakota. You know, we always, he's giggling back there. We'll have to inform him he's the most outstanding lawyer in South Dakota. You know, we always talk about in Farmers Union how lawyers are usually on the other side, and other people with a lot of money are usually on the other side from us on issues, bankers and so on. And but there are good lawyers, and there are lawyers who are on the side of the people. And I don't know if there are more than a handful of them in South Dakota, but Vincent Prosh is up there at the head of the list. And as you may know, he is one of the chief attorneys for East River Electric in Madison. And Vincent Prosh's law firm is in Howard, and he has a branch office over there in Madison. The fact that he's an REA attorney, I think, is testimony to his concern for people and people's programs. So without much further ado, I'm happy to introduce to you now the man who's going to win the Farmers Union property tax suit, Vincent Prosh.
Thank you, Alan. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here, and if lawyers could advertise, I probably ought to engage Mr. Burke as my public relations man. I want to, before I start, don't worry, I'm not going to give you all this stuff, but just a few notes that I think are quite important that we may have to use. I want to thank Mr. Krieber and Mr. Satara, who have been very gracious in cooperating with the Farmers Union in this tax suit. Now, in order to bring this tax suit, you have to have people in the area or in a school district, because it's really, this case goes to the essence of a child being deprived of a good education. Now, in giving you the factual background in this case, and I want to go back probably to a little history before I start, just to make it more palatable to understand, because this is a difficult question for anyone to talk upon, and there is such a thing as legal ethics of lawyers discussing cases before the courts, which they are now involved in. So I'm just going to give you a summary of what we've done, what we hope to do, and without prognosticating what the court may do. Certainly we don't want to get into that. But as you know, in colonial days, the wealth was measured in farmland, livestock, and cattle, and so forth. And that was fine in those days because their needs were not as great as they are today, as you know. However, today, most economists will tell you that the wealth is no longer measured in land, but is measured in stocks and bonds and so forth, which many people have, and which are taxed at a lot lower rate, as you know, even in South Dakota. That a person can have $100,000 in stocks and bonds and be taxed $4 a thousand, where your land is taxed way out of proportion to what it's worth, you might say. So that's the problem that we are facing in this taxation question, and this is one of the questions we are raising before the court. Now, this proposition of the wealth of a school district compared to the wealth of another school district in the same state raises a question of equal protection under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, which simply means that everybody should be treated alike within a certain category. You can put people in different categories and treat them different and still be within the constitutional limitations. However, we have brought this case under the as a violation of the 14th Amendment of depriving these young people here of an education based on the wealth of their school district as compared to other school districts and the other school districts' wealth. Now, in this case, it was necessary to have people who were living in the school district. However, in finding people to cooperate, which these people have generously and graciously done, lend their name to the complaint. We've talked with them and discussed their matter of their school district. Their school district was recently, last year, merged into Bonham School District number 96, and that's what's been holding up our case. Believe me, it isn't the lawyers, although lawyers sometimes are dilatory. What has held up our case is simply that we could not use the facts of the previous school district, or school year. In other words, the amount of property that was in the school district compared to the other property that would be in the school district based on an average daily membership of the child in the school district as a comparison, because this school district was not in existence at that time. It's a new school district. So we have been fighting with the Attorney General's office, who is kind of in I suppose, a unbalanced position in this case. I note that Gordon Midland has filed a brief in the United States Supreme Court in the Rodriguez case, which I want to discuss later, which is part of really this case. Not part of it, but it's based on the same facts. The Rodriguez case is another case out of Texas. It was tried in a federal court. In the federal court, a three-judge court held that the children there, based upon the wealth of their school district, was deprived of an education when compared to the wealth of another school district within the state. That case has been now appealed to the United States Supreme Court. It hopefully will be heard during the coming term of the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court should hold that that case is not the law, probably our case will not beat the law either. Anyway, I noticed that Midland has filed a amicus curiae brief with the United States Supreme Court attempting to dissuade the court from adopting the three-man court decision in the Rodriguez case. I also note that our governor has joined in a amicus curiae brief with other governors attempting to uphold the Rodriguez case. So there is a little confusion here about who represents the state of South Dakota, apparently. But anyway, in this case, what we have now, we're using as a basis, and it's the first case on the subject was the Serino case, Serino versus Priest, out of the state of California, which was a California Supreme Court decision of the state of California, which simply held that education is a fundamental interest, the child is entitled to it, and a child's education should not be based upon the wealth of a school district in compared to other children attending within the same county or in the same state, a school district which has a lot greater tax base in which to raise revenue to support their schools. Now that is simply the issue in this case before the South Dakota court. Now we brought this case in the federal district court, Judge Nichols' court in Sioux Falls. We could have gone to the state court, but I think it was, in discussing this with Mr. Radcliffe and Mr. Burke and others and my partners, we felt that it would be more advantageous to try the case in federal court because we have a federal question, which is the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, and also the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which says that you cannot discriminate against anybody. And this 64 Civil Rights Act, people, when they think of the Civil Rights Act, think of colored people and their rights, but the 1964 Civil Rights Act is very broad, and I think all of us can use it sometime or other in our lives. Now, California is as I said, it was a leading case on this. The California courts ruled that they could not discriminate against these children, and that their method of raising taxation, because they had in Beverly Hills tremendous property values and their taxes were low. In other words, what they were doing was spending less and taxing less, or spending more rather and taxing less. And in the poor districts, they were taxing more and spending less. So we have tried to make a comparison in the state of South Dakota somewhat based upon the revenues that each school district in each area has been able to obtain based on their property valuations. Now this, as I say, the final figures for this year are not in. We've served interrogatories, which are questions, or taking the deposition of Mr. Barnhart, who's been very cooperative with us, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and others up in Pear. And they have not been able to formulate their figures, run them through the computer, so we will not have them until November 15th. When we get these figures, we will make an analysis of them. And based upon our previous court hearing, Judge Nichols ruled that we will now try the case as a motion for summary judgment, which simply means that if our complaint does not state a cause of action, and we have amended it to, as I say, to to bring in under the umbrella of the complaint the 1964 Civil Rights Act as a because Minnesota used that, and the judge is a friend of Miles Lord, the federal judge in Minnesota, and he thought that was pretty good, so we decided we'd borrow from Judge Lord decision and put that in our case. However, there's where we're at the present time. At this hearing, when we will have a hearing, most of this will be disposed of as simply stipulated evidence. In other words, what are the facts and figures, and argument as to how they discriminate between school districts. And if the court should hold that the wealth of other school districts compared to the wealth of Bonham School District 96 deprives these children of equal protection of the law, we should win the case. However, the judge could hold to the contrary for the simple reason that in analyzing the preliminary figures, there's only $100 to $200 difference in the taxation based on average daily attendance, or membership rather. So we don't have in South Dakota the disparity that they've had in New Jersey, Texas, and California, but we do feel that we have some disparity that is worth bringing to the court's attention and attempting to get a ruling from the federal court. Now, many people have asked me why we've stayed out of the state court. Frankly, I think it's cheaper to stay out of the state court and go to the federal court, for the simple reason we have one judge. If we tried this case in the state court and lost it or won it, it would be appealed by someone to the Supreme Court of the state of South Dakota. Then, from the state of South Dakota, they could take an appeal direct to the United States Supreme Court. Well, I don't believe it'll be necessary for us to take any appeal to the United States Supreme Court, because once the Supreme Court rules on the Rodriguez case, which we are the same issue of law rather, the facts may be different because every state is different as to their taxing system, but generally speaking, the law will be made whether or not that you can use this wealth as a basis for depriving someone of equal protection. And if the Supreme Court of the United States so holds, I don't think there'll be any necessity for us to take any appeals to the contrary, and I think the state will then formulate a new tax policy. Now, what I want to do is tell you this. In California, everybody has mistaken the California decision as a great breakthrough in the taxation field. Well, that's not quite true. The California Supreme Court, after this case was determined, a few months later, or weeks later, regardless, it's immaterial, modified their original opinion, and they held that a determination of existing plan of government operations denies equal protection does not necessarily require invalidating the past acts of the legislature. In other words, what has been taxed up to that time is still good. It's only into the future. It's perspective rather than retroactive. So, and they've also held that the state legislature would have additional time after this case was tried back into the state courts, and I don't believe this Serino case has been tried on the merits yet. It was just merely tried as a motion for summary judgment, which is a lot of legal goop, you might say, but be as it may, the issues have not been tried on the facts, and there is no decision really as to the ultimate facts in that case. That case merely held that the complaint of the parties, Serino, stated a cause of action, and the court could hear the case. And the Supreme Court of California, when it modified its decision, threw it back to the trial court to determine the issues. And they also held if the trial court should uphold the case, then whatever they did would not affect anything that has been done in the past. Now, we had this question in South Dakota based on our case with the school district down in Alcester. The attorney for the school district called me, John Gubert. He was in a state of panic, and his bond lawyers from Minneapolis, some of the hot shots, very good lawyers, were also in a state of panic because they didn't hear of this case we had filed in federal court. And they had sold a great bond issue down there at Alcester for a school, and they found out that there's litigation pending, and when a bond attorney approves bonds, he has to state there is no litigation pending that will affect the sale of the bonds. And of course, these people were very, very upset about our case, and they didn't know what to do. Well, we made an agreement that anything that our case, the ultimate decision of our case, would not affect the sale of those bonds of that school district. I think that I signed the stipulation. Couldn't get a hold of Ben, but I took it on my own to sign it because we certainly didn't want to put the Farmers Union and our clients in a unfavorable position of holding up the sale of the school bonds when they had been sold and they had to deliver them. And then these lawyers from Minneapolis found that there was litigation pending, and they were afraid to okay the sale of the bonds and issue their opinion, and that actually stopped the sale of the bonds. So we did agree, after arguing with the Attorney General and our office on behalf of Farmers Union and Mr. Keeber and Cetera, entered into an agreement or stipulation that anything that the decision of this case would not affect the sale of those bonds. And this is what's happening in many states where these cases are pending. It's really held up the sale of bonds. It's held up the sale of bonds which are necessary to build new schools and so forth. However, we feel that in the future that there'll be a new method of taxation. Now, whatever it will be is believe me, I don't know. I don't have the answer to this. And if there's anybody that does, I'd like to talk to them. But this is what will happen is that the court should determine that we are right. He will give the legislature some time in which to adopt a new method of taxation. Not a new method, but a new means of distributing the wealth between the districts on a somewhat equal basis so that each child in each school district will have an equal opportunity. Now, you'll hear from many economists and many experts in schools, and not the Coons report, but the Coleman report that was made in 1966 by the federal government, which held that spending money of a school district doesn't make any difference to the ultimate education of a child. It's what the child learns at home, and it's the family environment that ultimately determines the child's ability to learn in school. Well, that I think is to that extent true, but we all know that the ability of a school district to meet its requirements, to pay its teachers, to afford the children an opportunity, they must have money. And we also know that there are school districts which have a lot of money in this state and are giving their children probably more benefits than children of other school districts are able to obtain because they do not have the tax base in their area or their school district in which to raise the funds to support the school that we'd all like to have. Now, that is the sum and substance of this case. Now, the status of this case, I say, is still in the federal court. We're waiting for the final figures from the Department of Instruction as to the school year 1971-72, and when we receive those, then we are going to present it to the court along with other evidence, and the court will then probably determine whether our complaint states a cause of action or whether we're entitled to relief based upon the evidence. The judge has agreed to hear most anything and everything about this case, and pending whatever may happen in the Supreme Court on the Rodriguez case, which should be decided in before March of this year, or the coming year, that we will know if we're in the ballpark. Now, if the Supreme Court says the Rodriguez case is out, then actually our theory of law and our theory of our lawsuit is also out, and we might as well pack up our papers and go home. But we don't know. We do, from reading all these cases, and there's quite a few of them, and reading volumes of information on this stuff and studying the issues from all angles, I'm quite certain that our Supreme Court, based on its I would have said this, the Warren Court would have upheld it. I don't know what the Burger Court would do. Nixon has replaced some of the judges with ace conservatives, you might say, or ultra conservatives, and you don't know exactly what their position would be. It's almost impossible to determine their feelings on a case of this kind. But if they file the Serino case and the reasoning of the forward-looking Supreme Court of California, which is, by the way, one of the best state courts in the country and has some of the finest lawyers and judges on that court, and every lawyer that practices law recognizes the United States, the State Supreme Court of California is probably one of the finest courts in the land. If they should, and I think our Supreme Court would have some feeling towards that court because of the quality of the men on the court, that possibly the Supreme Court will uphold the Rodriguez case. Now, if they do, we will carry on. We do hope to have this case in court before the federal judge, before the Supreme Court renders its decision in the Rodriguez case. But I don't know, and I wouldn't want to attempt to guess what Judge Nichols would do, because he's well acquainted with these cases, and he might just hold up making a decision on our case until the Supreme Court either affirms or disaffirms the Rodriguez case. So this is a difficult subject for anyone to talk on. I just wanted to, Mr. Radcliffe asked me to give you a report, which I'm very happy to come up here and visit with a lot of my friends I see in the audience, some of our Howard boys out there, and Salem people that I know, that I just wanted to give you a kind of an up-to-date report of what's going on. And if you have any questions, I'll be glad to attempt to answer them. I might not be able to give you the exact answer, but I think I can at least put your mind to rest on some of the issues in this case. So really, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to, if you don't want to ask them publicly, I'll be over in the corner for a while, and I'd be happy to answer them privately for you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me the questions and raise your hand, and I'll acknowledge you and attempt to ask it. Yes, sir. Emo, I think that what I said was that the California case, the Serino case, has been decided on the law, but not the facts in California. It was the Serino case held that the wealth of a school, just simply this, that you can't discriminate. It's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause to discriminate against school districts or between school districts because of the wealth of one school district having greater wealth than the other. And that deprives the children of a fundamental interest, which is education. Now, and the Serino case was not appealed to the United States Supreme Court, but the Rodriguez case, which is the same type of case, Mr. Larks, in Texas, which was determined by a 3-judge court, has been appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. And South Dakota has joined in that appeal, or not joined in the appeal. The Attorney General has joined as a friend of the court, amicus curiae they call that, to attempt to override or upset the 3-man court. Governor Knipe has joined in a brief supporting the Rodriguez case with other governors, the governor of Minnesota, the governor of other states. There's about 10 or 12 governors have joined in it to say, let's uphold the Rodriguez case. It's good law. The Attorney General in this state has joined in a brief and said, let's not uphold it. Let's keep the status quo, you see. Did I answer your question? Now, anybody else have a question? I'll be happy to field it. Well, if not, let me say this, that I'm very happy to be here today and to give you a sketchy report of what we're doing on your behalf and Mr. Keeper and Satara's behalf. And I want to say this, that again, that I certainly appreciate the cooperation I've had from these people down in Baum, Hunt County, and also the excellent cooperation I've had from your officers, Ben and Alan Burke and I have made trips to down to see these people and explain the case a couple of times to them and keep them up to date. We've explored all the possibilities. They have been very gracious in furnishing me information that I didn't have, and they were able to get for me. Alan has been very good in that respect, and find people to deal with, and let's hope that we'll have a victory. Thank you very much.
And ladies and gentlemen, it's a rare privilege for my wife and I to be here this evening to participate in the closing hours of your South Dakota Farmers Union Annual Convention. I've known your president, Ben Radcliffe, for many years, and prominent in your membership are farmers with whom I have worked on REA problems over the past decade. Our states were once a territory. I can tell you that I bring you sincere greetings of affection to you from the citizens of your sister state, North Dakota. Gene and I have been in office long enough so that we have come to know 150 governors and first ladies. And I can say without any reservation that two of our favorite people are Richard and Nancy Knipe. And I've had a chance to evaluate the activities of 150 governors, and I can make this prediction that someday when Richard Knipe's record is written in South Dakota, that he will go down as not only one of the great governors of this state, but one of the real great governors in the upper Midwest. And when I leave office, there are so many things that he and I have worked together on that I have the comforting feeling that there is going to be follow-through, and very powerful, aggressive follow-through from Dick Knipe. Well, you've heard a lot of politicians today, and I've also heard that it was a very interesting, inspirational type of give and take. Now, I decided that I shouldn't, well, it was suggested that I shouldn't talk about politics tonight. And so I'll try to avoid that. But I wonder how many of you knew that General Custer was a Democrat? General Custer was so much a Democrat that history tells us that that great New York kingmaker, newspaper publisher, James Gordon Bennett, called General Custer back to New York, and he said, "General, I can secure for you the nomination for President of the United States on the Democratic ticket. But," he said, "first of all, you've got to go back to Dakota Territory and do something that will make headlines." Well, like a lot of Democrats, he overdid it. Now, I've dealt with 6 Republican legislatures in North Dakota since I've been governor. And I realize that legend says that the Indians got George Custer. But frankly, after dealing with those Republican legislatures, I'm not so sure it was the Indians. Like most of you in this audience, I am a farmer. I still keep in close touch with my farm by planning its operation and paying the bills every month. We marketed 274 pigs this year from 30 sows. When I got that first check last July for a load of hogs that went for $29.75, I was a little embarrassed to sit at a lunch counter and hear someone nearby order a ham sandwich. But then I would remember that I was subsidizing the consumer on nearly everything else I sold off the farm, and gradually my guilt feeling would subside. I was torn by amusement and outrage this year to see the administration rush to put price controls on raw agricultural products by such devices as increased meat imports and quota restrictions on hide exports at a time when that same administration was piously saying that there would be no price controls placed on raw agricultural commodities, and those prices were free to move as long as they didn't move upward. For more than 25 years, the farmers have been the economic shock absorber for this nation's economy. The farmer is still expected to continue to increase his productivity in order to hang on, while the middleman and the processor absorb the benefits of that increased productivity, and the consumer enjoys a constantly shrinking percentage of his paycheck going for food and fiber. This Nixon administration put the cutting torch to farmers when it allowed inflation to run completely out of control for 2.5 years before it made any attempt whatsoever to halt it. Inflation still eats away at the farming industry in a way that is beyond comparison in any other segment of our nation's economy. It was the Nixon administration that has carefully refrained from interest rate controls. The lending industry has enjoyed a massive payoff for the last 3.5 years. If the Farm Support Program was half as good as the support program for lenders, we would be putting new brick fronts on our pole barns just as all the banks have been able to do on their fronts. There is no industry as heavily dependent on credit as is farming. There's no way that a farmer can pass off his inflating costs and the larcenous interest rates by raising his prices or fees, as does every other industry and profession in America today. The farmer must stand hat in hand and take what is offered for his product. And he is expected to dance in the streets when the price of wheat is allowed to go up, as it did following the great Grain Export Corporation harvest of profits from the Russian wheat deal a few months ago. I came from a very, very small town of Amenia, North Dakota. Now, bear in mind I said Amenia. I didn't say amnesia. I didn't say anemia. I said Amenia, my hometown. Amenia was Sanforized and pre-shrunk when it was founded. It was 85 people when I was a kid, and it still has 85 people today. I remember those desperate, Dust Bowl Depression days of the 1930s. Some of you men in the audience can remember those Dust Bowl days of the 30s, and you women are just going to have to take my word for it. Our little town of Amenia in those Dust Bowl Depression days of the 1930s was so poverty-stricken that our city dump was only able to support 3 rats. It amazes me that solid waste disposal is one of the big problems in cities around this country today. But back in those dirty 30s, we didn't worry about solid waste disposal in Amenia because we were either wearing it or driving it. We've never been successful in attracting industry to Amenia. As a matter of fact, we have only one yellow page in our phone book, and that's white on one side. and the yellow side is taken up with a 3/4 page telephone ad. You're all from the small community areas. You know what I'm talking about when I say that Amenia was a struggling little town. But you've noticed that some struggling little towns try to appear bigger than they really are. I've seen some of these kind of towns place a sign at the end of Main Street which says, "No U-turns." But Amenia was different. At the end of our Main Street, we had a sign that said, "U-turns are permitted." And some wag painted underneath, "For what?" The story of what is happening around Amenia and to Amenia is much the same as what we see in all of rural America. The people left in Amenia include many widows, many retired farm couples, and there are all too few young people coming back. There is something terrible wrong in America today, and nobody in this present administration seems to understand it, let alone give the leadership needed to correct it. We all know about the congestion in our cities. We know from reading our newspapers and magazines and watching television that there is a ghastly economic and social cost resulting from overcrowding in the cities. We are aware of the crime, the pollution, the drug abuse, the racism, the poverty, and the hopeless frustration of the ghettos in the cities. This is so dramatic and so easily seen in its horrible proportions. Farm families are well aware of what's happening in the cities. But do city people know what's happening on the farms? Far too few people recognize that there is another side of the coin of congestion, that the other side is what is happening in rural America as people are forced from the farms and small towns. We are developing a very serious situation in America, where people are shifted from rural communities to cities and from city to city so rapidly that they never have a chance to set their roots and contribute to community living, to say nothing of community leadership. We are expected to snatch some quick enjoyment out of life while we are on the move and on the run. There are fewer and fewer opportunities to simply become hometown folks. We are told that this country might expect 100 million new Americans by the end of this century. Where will they live? Will they be piled on top of those people already living out wasted lives, bathed in pollution and poverty and crime? Or will there be opportunities for them to enjoy a quality of living in that part of America which has the capacity to support more people? Far too few city people realize that the other side of that congestion coin is the loss of people from the land in rural America. City people don't realize that when small communities lose population, they also lose a tax base necessary to provide the services that make for a quality of life at an acceptable level. Schools close, sewer and water systems are not repaired, law enforcement becomes too costly, and village parks are run down at the heels. City people don't realize that when small communities lose people, they lose the only reason for the existence of institutions like schools, hospitals, churches, Boy Scout troops, and 4-H clubs. What should be a rich and rewarding part of American society then becomes thin and threadbare. There are two major causes of rural-urban imbalance in the United States today. The federal government, through its many uncoordinated programs, is the most severe cause. The federal government is following no goals, and many programs, such as the Farm Commodity Support Program, oftentimes hurt as much as they help. But a second cause of this rural-urban imbalance and people crowding into congested areas is the growing domination of big corporation influence in our daily lives. All too often, big corporation decision is an impersonal, cold decision-making process that completely ignores human, individual, or social consequences. Do you believe for 1 minute that this nation should be run by the people that brought Lockheed and Penn Central to its knees? Do you believe for 1 minute that the high moral standards of ITT and the export grain corporations should set our national standards of morality? Do you believe that the big oil corporations that slip huge gobs of money into Mexican bank accounts in order to erase its origin before it is shipped back to the United States to influence our elections, do you think these corporations should be allowed to control national policy? We desperately need a national policy of distribution of opportunity in order to voluntarily distribute people in this country. And that policy should be for people, not mergers, not conglomerates, and not super corporations. When I speak of distribution of opportunity, I am speaking of far more than profitable investment opportunities, which are so necessary to create jobs. I am speaking of the opportunities that people seek in addition to profits and jobs. We know that man does not live by bread alone. In addition to jobs, people seek opportunities for education, health services, recreational opportunities, and opportunities for cultural enrichment. We know that to many, many people, the opportunities for health care or recreation or education are even more important than their work. Far too many of our young people, particularly our young people, are leaving the rural countryside because these other opportunities beyond a job do not exist for them in the country. And tragically, those opportunities that they seek elsewhere oftentimes don't exist there either. The Nixon administration does not seem to understand the relationship between what is happening on the farms and in the small towns and the continual crisis that we know so well in the cities. I am convinced in talking with Senator McGovern that he is a national leader who does understand this relationship. This is why I didn't hesitate when he asked me to serve as the national chairman of Rural America for McGovern-Shriver. If our nation would establish a national goal or policy of opportunity distribution, it would start with a definite objective of stabilizing the flow of people from the farms and rural communities. We could shape so many complementary national and state programs around such a goal, including the agricultural program. A farm program which recognizes the social value of keeping people on the farms must be established. This simply means that such things as grain certificate payments and our commodity loans must be geared to reward family farming rather than to be allowed to continue to induce increased corporation farming. Unfortunately, when a farm program increases the price of a bushel of grain, it attracts non-farmer land purchase and corporation farming, just like corn silage attracts flies. We need social safeguards that cut down on the number of flies that are attracted to agriculture. Without social safeguards, an increased price for farm commodities is an open invitation to non-farmer investment in agriculture and encroachment of large-scale corporation farming. I don't see any evidence in the Nixon administration that it is concerned with social safeguards. As a matter of fact, I'm concerned that the young executives in the United States Department of Agriculture have recommended that we turn people resources out of agriculture in large numbers, and that we dismember the Department of Agriculture and put such agencies as the Farm Home Administration and the Rural Electric Administration into other, as they say, more related departments. I'm concerned that there is a definite move that is simply dormant during this campaign season to relegate the most important industry in America, farming, to a second-class concern by reducing the Department of Agriculture to less than cabinet status. And I'm concerned about that. Rural communities need expanding industry to furnish opportunity for its youth and to give seasonal employment to the underemployed on the farms. We could provide more off-farm employment in and around our small towns by various methods, including tax incentives and low-interest rate loan incentives to industries that would expand to rural communities. We could guarantee these new expansion industries manpower training programs so that they would be assured of a trained source of labor. We could revamp our outmoded interstate commerce freight rate structure to allow rural communities to compete with established production centers which have enjoyed a competitive advantage for years. But just as important, we need to see that those other opportunities for a good life are available in rural America in order to hold or even attract people. This means that complete advantages of educational facilities must be at hand. And this includes more than primary and secondary education. It includes vocational and adult education in rural America too. This means that our health services, including hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, and dental and mental health services, must be available in rural areas. This means that cultural advantages of theater, music, art, and libraries should exist in areas that have the capacity to hold and absorb more people. This means that recreational facilities must be established for farm families and small town residents, just as it's being established for those in the city. What I am saying to you is that if we as farmers do not recognize the business of family farming and small town living as a socially desirable goal for America, we can expect to contribute by default to a continuation of the diminishing of the quality of life in the countryside as well as in the cities. This is a time of decision. We have the opportunity to make our voices heard, especially strong each 4 years at election time. Senator George McGovern is our only chance in 1972 to halt the headlong flight from the land and small towns in America. I congratulate you people in South Dakota for having given Senator George McGovern the opportunity to develop into a great leader and a great spokesman for a better America. Not only does Senator McGovern understand what is happening in Amenia, North Dakota, in Vienna, South Dakota, and how it relates to New York City, but he knows how our great country should relate itself to the rest of the world. Senator McGovern asks that the United States of America become a world leader. Some would say that we are a world leader. Look at our military might. But McGovern sees far more in our potential role as a world leader than simply a nation captivated by its capacity of nuclear overkill as a military power. He sees America as a leader among nations in establishing new and higher moral standards. You and I should demand that our public servants lead this nation in observing the highest moral standards. If we define morality as the degree of excellence in the practice of that which is right, then we should help leaders like Senator George McGovern establish a new high standard of morality for America, a high standard of morality for us to follow in our dealings with one another. And just as important, we need to establish a moral and compassionate relationship with the people the world over. I congratulate the Farmers Union for its many years of success in representing family farmers. But I say to you that the need was never greater than it is today to become involved in the democratic process of improving the opportunities for all our people in America.
Thank you very much, Governor Guy. Lee, will you come up here and, Lee? We have a drawing that I almost forgot.